Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Alexandra Pinzon, and I'm Global Canopy's Nature Positive Lead, and I'm hosting today's webinar. Before we start with the business of the day, a few housekeeping points. Please post any questions you have throughout the webinar in the Q&A box. We will get to the questions later. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available shortly after the webinar ends. At the end of the webinar, you will see a survey pop up on your screen. Please look out for it. We welcome your feedback. Now to business. We have a big audience today. For those of you who don't know us, Global Canopy is an international nonprofit based in Oxford. We focus on tackling the market forces that destroy nature, and we do so through transparency and accountability, and we have a number of data partnerships you may be familiar with, such as Encore, Trace, and Forest 500. Our work on nature spans dependence, impact, and opportunity, and I'm thrilled that today the topic of the conversation is the opportunity side of the equation. We are delighted to launch the Little Book of Nature Business today. The book offers a simple, inspirational guide to investing in a nature-positive economy, and it does so by crucially widening the horizon of investing in nature to the whole of the economy. And we have been extremely lucky to work with an extraordinary set of partners, including the speakers and panelists that are joining us today and their organizations. We now intend to deepen the methods to support financial institutions in assessing and investing in credible nature-related opportunities. And so we are delighted to initiate that conversation today and invite you to join this journey. The insights and examples in the Little Book of Nature Business are meant as a thought, but also as an action companion. We need to accelerate the pace of capital mobilization toward nature-related activities, and this is the mindset behind this webinar. If you haven't already, please download your copy of the Little Book of Nature Business. It's in our website. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to the book's donors. You can see them on this slide. We could not have published the book without their support. Today, we will discuss what is in the Little Book of Nature Business for financial institutions. We'll also hear from our panel of experts about the role that investors can play in the transition toward a nature-positive economy. Without further ado, please let me introduce our speakers and panelists today. Andrew Mitchell, the book's co-author and Global Canopy's founder and senior advisor, who's joining us from Jersey. David Craig, co-chair of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, joining us from London. John Tobin-de Puente, the book's co-author and professor of practice at the Samuel Curtis Johnson College of Business at Cornell University, joining us from Spain. Dorothy Maseke, head of ANCA Secretariat and lead Nature Finance and TNFD for FSD Africa, joining us from Cape Town. Santiago Cortés, Senior Responsible Investment Manager at APG Asset Management, joining us from New York. Mitch Reznick, Group Head of Fixed Income London at Federated Hermes, joining us from London. But before we get started, we'd like to run a quick poll to find out what you think. Do you believe most investors know what investing in nature really means? Yes or no? We'll give a few moments for people to answer the poll. So, I'm not entirely sure about the results of the poll. Okay, it sounds like most of you think that investors don't know what investing in nature means. Hopefully, some of the discussion throughout this webinar is going to help tackle that issue. Now, on to the book. Andrew, you have 50 years of experience in nature conservation and finance. You were a co-founder of the TNFD. Now you are a co-author of the Little Book of Nature Business. Tell us what motivated you to write the book and your vision for it.
Alexandra, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I've kind of been at this work for nearly 50 years at the front line of nature conservation, and in the last 15, trying to get an overlap between nature and money, nature and finance, and looking at disclosure and risk and all those sort of things. And I kind of felt we needed to put more emphasis on the opportunity side. And the reason why was that whenever I spoke to asset managers and pension fund people, often with TNFD, and you said, well, what about nature investing? What comes up in their mind is a sort of image of a butterfly or possibly a farmer or maybe a tree. And the vision of nature investing tends to be quite limited to certain sectors. And yet, if you look into the whole of the economy, you find that nature is at work throughout the economy. And so I thought if we could come up with a book that was a simple guide, we could look at nature across many different sectors and try to give examples of where nature fits in and how it is investable. So this is the 9th in the Global Canopy Little Book series, the first one being the Little Red Book many years ago. The last one was the Little Book of Investing in Nature. And this one, the Little Book of Nature Business, is really what you put your money into. Where can it get to work? And I think this is all about investing in the transition. And I think we want to get over the fact that nature is big. It's not small. Often I had some banks say, well, nature is really nice, but it's really small. I heard somebody say that publicly the other day, and it isn't small. And of course, we all know our economy is underpinned by nature. Totally. Some say 50% is probably 100%. Take away nature and you haven't got an economy. But where is it? Where can I actually invest in it? So what we started looking at was, first of all, how do we define this new term, nature business? And John Tobin and I was able to recruit John, who we worked to before on the Little Book of Investing in Nature at Cornell. And so we came up with a definition. You can find it in the book. But very simply, if you take nature out of the product, have you still got a product? And if you take something like bioplastics, for instance, you take nature out of bioplastics, the nature product that it comes from, you don't really have a product anymore. Now, to an extent, some of these can be manufactured artificially and so on, but that was sort of a simple guide. And so we started looking at this. We took 8 sectors of the economy, running through the food system, construction, utilities, both electricity and water, or energy and water, I should say, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and apparel. We looked at others, but those are the 8 that we chose that have big impacts on nature. The book's got 80 plus case studies in it, at a valuation of around about 280 billion, all these innovations that we look at in the book. And with their estimated growth rates up to 2030, the estimates are that they'd go up to about 700 billion by 2030. And this is just 80. We have many more case studies. We just couldn't fit them all in the book. And they range from things like vertical farming in the agricultural or food sector, making buildings of cross-laminated timber using high-rise buildings made out of timber instead of concrete. Bioplastics already mentioned, but eco-desalination, which is growing particularly in hot countries like the Middle East, where you need a lot of fresh water, but using nature tech in the desalination process to make it more efficient. Even shoes that are made out of mushrooms. A lovely company in Indonesia that's making trainers out of mushroom leather, and you can toss it in the compost heap and it dissolves. So this is really turning upside down some of these product lines that we might have had, say, from fossil fuels. Nature has a solution. Why do we need to do this? Well, we have a big nature turnaround that's needed. We have, according to UNEP's State of Finance for Nature report, just out last month, or rather in January at the World Economic Forum, that's 7.5 trillion of nature negative money flowing around the world. It's like a tsunami. And if we just put in, as we do today, of 500 billion into protecting nature, it's constantly overwhelmed by the trillions. So we've got $1 billion solution fighting $1 trillion problem. And therefore, we need to do the turnaround in the real world economy.
Thank you, Andrew.
So we complemented all the frameworks as well. I just want to make the point that making it work with TNFD, World Economic Forum, and Nature Positive Initiative, getting the language and alignment was a major part of what we did. And I think we've achieved that. Thank you, Alex. Back to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Lots of food for thought and lots of scope to actually expand the view of nature. The book introduces the concept of nature business as an investable subset of nature-related opportunities. And we are fortunate today to have with us co-chair of the TNFD, David Craig. David, could you tell us about how the book and its concept of nature business fits with the broader area of nature-related opportunities and how it might support financial institutions seeking to align with the TNFD?
Well, thank you very much, Alex. It's always great to follow Andrew. He articulates things so clearly and passionately and powerfully. A billion-dollar business fighting a trillion-dollar problem is a great way to articulate it. Congratulations, John and Andrew, and everyone involved in this book, having been through many calls and inputs and reviews. I really do appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this from many experts around the world. I think it's groundbreaking. I think it's the best and biggest, and hopefully not the last, example of case studies of something that I think is really important. A lot of people in the survey just confirmed that, are struggling with how do I invest in nature? And the problem is people resort back to what Andrew calls, or I call, the bees and trees problem, which is there's only so much money you can put into bees and trees, even though that's very valuable and very important. But if you look at the real world economy, not just financial investment, but real companies, the type of companies that are all adopting the TNFD, they're now realizing that in assessing their interface to nature, they need to and can find alternatives that reduce cost, improve operational efficiency, generate alternative products, create resilience in their supply chain, or create financial innovation. And the examples in the book all illustrate many of these areas. And simply put, investing in nature, as corporations are discovering, is about investing in things that do less harm. How do I find materials that don't pollute? How do I find alternatives that don't destroy the environment? How do I improve my resource efficiency or land efficiency so I'm not doing all of the things that damage nature? And that's what's exciting about these examples. And it comes at a really timely moment. Recent reports that are coming out from TNFD, and there are now hundreds in the public domain, are really interesting because what they actually show is this is not just about disclosure, it's about decision making. 40% of all of the companies that are conducting a TNFD assessment are publicly stating that they're making changes to their strategy, to their procurement, to their operations. And a third of all companies are actually discovering opportunities along the lines of what I just mentioned: resilience, resource efficiency, opportunities, cost saving. I think that's really striking, and it demonstrates the opportunity that we have in front of us. Andrew mentioned the billions of dollar opportunity. If you look at the UK alone, where I sit, this market is well over 2.5 billion. It's growing at 25%, and it's some of the most innovative, fastest moving companies in the planet. And what we need to do is promote them, encourage them, find ways of making them scale, because the challenge is that they're battling industrial supply chains that have been built off petroleum and oil and standard products for the last 50 years. So if there's one thing to learn from this book, it's that the case examples are real case examples. They show what is not just possible, but what is practical. They're real. I think the call to arms for all of us is companies need to accelerate their assessment of their dependencies and impacts on nature. They need to get into the decision-making quickly about where are alternatives and processes and things that they can use. And they need to invest in and support these small companies that are creating these new processes, these new technologies and these materials, and get behind them so that we can achieve scale faster than the market on its own can achieve, because we don't have time. The impacts that we're creating are far too dangerous for our economies, our society, for nature and people. So we need to achieve scale. And I just want to say that if there's one thing this book teaches you is, here are all of the opportunities over all of these industries where we can achieve that scale. And the question is, how do we do that faster than we do today?
Thank you, David. In summary, the book and the TNFD have the same approach to the concept of nature-related opportunities. It's just that we focus on a subset of those nature-related opportunities, which is the investable subset. but fundamentally, we're aiming to basically present opportunities that deliver positive outcomes for nature and for the organizations undertaking them. Santiago, I will move on to you now. Your organization, looking at it from a financial sector perspective, your organization manages pension assets. What's in the book, in your view, for organizations like yours?
Alexandra, thank you. And first of all, thank you to the Global Canopy team and for the invitation to participate in this conversation. And thank you as well. And congratulations to John, Andrew, and everyone who participated in the development and creation of this book. I think this is a great piece of work and does a great job, to David's point, kind of creating a clear bridge between theory and practice. The more I think about it, I kind of consider these kind of little series or these series of little books as including, of course, this new one focused on nature business and the little book of investing in nature as kind of different volumes of what I am kind of thinking about as an encyclopedia of investing in nature. And to that point, I would say that back to the results of the poll that we saw, 93% of people not thinking or having a clear idea of how to invest in nature. I think that asset managers, pension funds, and pretty much the broader financial sector should start kind of using these little series of books, first and foremost, to kind of educate their professionals, ensure that everyone is talking the same language, ensure that everyone is aligned in terms of understanding what are the main initiatives, what are the main frameworks, what are kind of the main financial mechanisms that are out there to ensure that they can apply them in their daily basis and to really understand pretty much what is the role that the different organizations within the financial sector can play a role in rethinking, reshaping our relationship with nature. So I think in a nutshell, I think education is key. I think we have to, as a group, we have to promote the adoption of this book. We have to ensure everyone reads it, understands it, and really understand that there's a lot of case studies and a lot of things happening on the ground that are investable as of today.
Thank you, Santiago. You mentioned the need for education, alignment on language, and identifying the role that different organizations in the financial sector need to play in the transition to a nature-positive economy. Can you elaborate on what would be the most effective way to accelerate that capacity building and education for the financial sector? And what do you think the role of, for example, pension funds could be?
Yeah, well, Alexandra, to be honest, I think each organization should kind of think about trying to extract what is the most valuable concept of these little series of books. I think starting from the very basics of definitions, ensuring that everyone understands what biodiversity is. I don't know if everyone within the financial sector has a good understanding of that basic knowledge and concepts that we have to ensure that everyone is on top of. So creating workshops, creating different spaces of discussion, different spaces of bringing different multidisciplinary groups together to promote kind of this common understanding. I think that's kind of again back to the first basic kind of creating a foundational knowledge about what we're talking about, and then of course from there transition to kind of clear ways of accessing the market, understanding where are the opportunities, understanding how is that you can approach the market from the different asset classes you're focused on. So I think again that little series or these series of books is a very good way of bridging all the theory that we need to ensure is in place and then kind of ensuring that we translate that into the practice.
Thank you, Santiago. That's really helpful. Dorothy, are you with us? I'm going to go to you next.
Yes, I am.
How do you think Africa's financial institutions can best leverage the book and its insights to support economic and social transformation? Great to have you back.
No, thank you very much. So I'll start with very quickly our core mandate, which is financial sector deepening at FSD Africa and working across regulators, banks, insurance, etc. And this particular book serves as a very strategic guide in this journey where we are working with a broader ecosystem. I use that word loosely to integrate nature into financial systems, which is central for resilience, for long-term value, for systemic stability. So, for example, in the work where we are supporting thematic or nature bonds, it helps sharpen the narrative. It works through sector prioritization, but more importantly, it shows real examples. When we build capacity with financial institutions, for many years, we've been speaking of this as a very theoretical concept. But with the book and the real examples, we are now able to show, and we will be able to show structured initiatives, real pilot examples, but more importantly, examples that are actually working, that go beyond what we are used to, which is disclosure. Because what we do within the TNFD journey with financial institutions, we begin with the risks, risks, impacts, dependencies. But this book particularly shows the opportunities piece and how to go beyond disclosure into these investable pipelines. The last piece as I finish is that in our pipeline generation and blended finance facilities work, then we are also able to show that they are scalable and possible business models. And therefore, real economy transition can actually happen and capital can move with confidence into nature.
Thank you, Dorothy. You mentioned pipeline generation. What, in your view, are the most investable nature-related opportunities you're seeing in Africa, and what are the bottlenecks to scale?
Yeah, so let me just say that even as we've been looking at this pipeline, I want to still say that we are indeed seeing a growing number of nature-related opportunities, investments emerging, which is very encouraging. We are broadly seeing sustainability-linked initiatives coming through. We are seeing blended finance facilities for regenerative agriculture, whereby now it's able to combine the biodiversity and regenerative aspect of it, and moving from what we were calling core climate smart agriculture. We are also seeing interest from institutional investors in green and resilience bonds. But when I go specifically to your question, I want to say that we've seen examples. We have, and this is public, Nedbank has been for many, many years a strong supporter of conservation partnerships, establishing the WWF Nedbank Green Trust, which essentially funds biodiversity and ecosystem conservation initiatives. But what we're seeing is now a shift from that philanthropic piece of we are going to be supporting WWF, or banks saying they're going to be supporting conservation agencies, into banks now leaning in and saying, how can they work together with these agencies to issue bonds? There's an upcoming bond, which unfortunately I'm not authorized to speak about, but you will soon see it. And these are the kind of initiatives that we are saying are actually showing that this is possible, and this is possible within our market. Carbon markets are big in Africa. Of course, we know the challenges that they face, but it is the one that has been proven to be quite or much more investable in our market. We have our development banks, Development Bank of South Africa with its biodiversity investment fund. We have a Flexim Bank as a very good example, with financing sustainable commodity supply chains, working on the bioeconomy value chains and other vehicles linked to natural resource sustainability. So there are numerous examples, but I can tell you, watch this space, and you will see even more. And this book really, really goes to show that there are possibilities.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Mitch, I'm moving on to you now. What is your take on how the book can support investors of all types?
Yeah, first of all, I have to echo the congratulations on this book. It is a wonderful piece of work. It is little maybe a name. It's big in size and it's dense and there's a ton of information. And thanks for having me, Federated Hermes Global Asset Manager with a legacy or history in responsible investing. So first of all, I think for all investors, what's lovely about it is it addresses, so whether it's an equity or credit, you're straight away addressing the principles, the forces, and the factors of investing in nature, and therefore, from that point of view, it's universal to all investors, and it's applying those principles into which part of the capital stack you're going to be investing in. But I think also that this book, why it's so helpful, it's sort of, if you think in concentric circles, it places, it's got, context, sort of data, information, opportunity, then definitions, taxonomies, frameworks, and then to wrap all that up together, you have the case studies, and all that is, culminates in a way in these case studies that both David and Andrew referred to, because even for someone like me, looking for these opportunities, I struggle with like, okay, how can we monetize nature in the right way, have visibility and revenue, something that generates cash flows that doesn't end in carbon credits and biodiversity credits. And I don't mean that to diminish those, but they're, from a point of scale, investors really need to see the revenue model and to see visibility and cash flow, and those biodiversity credits, which is developing, and the carbon credits are hugely important. But in some ways, for scale, but I think they're maybe kind of add-on kind of upside opportunities. And what you have in this book, at least for me, was this much better visibility into what those opportunities are. Let me just run through a couple other aspects of this of the book. This, I think to the question that was addressed to Santiago. Look, the simplification of complex systems and ideas is quite an achievement, and that's addressed here. I can borrow language, diagrams from my decks, from when I stand up and talk to people, when I articulate it. This I think, Andrew, you referred to it, the verticals that show the different sleeves of economic activities, catalyzed by the horizontals, the catalysts, the finance and technology. These are the enablers, and that is a really good framework. So there are, quite a few other things, the investment framework, but all of that is really useful for a whole suite of investors. But this simplification of complex ideas and systems is really, really important.
Thank you, Mitch. John, I'm moving on to you. You're a co-author of the book. Mm-hmm. When you wrote it, how did you intend for it to support financial institutions in investing in a nature-positive economy?
Well, when we started thinking about this book, we felt that a handy guide that would aid bankers and other finance professionals in their own discussions with their stakeholders, their clients, their colleagues, and others within and outside of financial institutions. A handy book that would allow them to recognize and transmit the message that nature business is a wide open area and that it covers any number of economic activities that go far beyond what people normally associate with investing in nature. That could be a great aim. And I really, looking back on what we have done in this book and how we have organized the information, I do feel that it can be a useful guide to finance professionals in getting the message out, in helping clients understand, as Andrew and others have said, nature business is about a lot more than trees, bees, and farmers.
Thank you so much, John. We are moving to an exciting part of this webinar, and it's hearing about a couple of favorite examples of investable nature business opportunities that are in the book and beyond. Andrew, let's start with you. What would be your favorite example?
Well, again, I can't get away from the idea of self-healing concrete. When I first heard about that, I thought that's really weird. But the idea is you get hairline cracks in buildings, and that's the beginning of the end for many of the buildings because you've got a lot of money spent on maintenance. So how do you deal with the crack when it's tiny? Well, the answer is you have concrete that are impregnated with bacteria and a food substrate. When the crack occurs, a little tiny crack, rain gets in, it wakes up the bacteria, they eat the substrate, and then they create limestone and it seals the crack. And that's an example of a startup business which could revolutionize concrete and maintenance of buildings. You can do it on roads as well, by the way. Big scale, sponge cities in China, $15 billion being spent on cities there to repurpose the surroundings and the interiors of these cities in China to stop flooding. Climate change, too much water, the engineering can't cope, use nature to soak up the water and permeable pavements, no more flooding, that kind of thing. Energy sector, wind farms as reefs. I love this too. Wind farms in the ocean, you can wrap the stems from the bottom of the ocean upwards and create coral reefs and make them net positive for fish. This is happening not only in the tropics, but also in temperate waters, making fishermen happy. More fish coming out of the wind farms that were there before. Amazing.
That sounds great, Andrew. Thank you so much. Dorothy, how about you? Do you have a favorite
example? Yes. And that was a very difficult question to give us because I really struggled to pick. But as you know, I obviously picked examples that were rooted in Africa or touching on Africa. And this is because, like I said, it's about showing real examples that can be invested in. And so in food systems, I really liked Mirova's, I think they call it sustainable land fund investing in Ghana's cocoa value chain. And then, of course, the whole aspect of sustainable macadamia production in Kenya and Tanzania. And this is really close for us, especially in Africa, where agriculture plays a big role driving our economies, with 65% of the world's arable land being in Africa. And so it shows that regenerative models can also be commercially viable at scale. We don't have to choose between food and development. And so that was quite compelling. I liked the tile green in Egypt, turning plastic waste into low carbon construction materials. As you know, we are really, really growing. The populations are growing. And so when I look at that being powerful, not only because it's reducing the carbon intensity of cement, but also diverting plastic from landfills and waterways. And then finally, biomimicry. There was an example from Zimbabwe.
Excellent. Thank you, Dorothy. Santiago, what would be your one favorite example to go with?
Yeah, well, I echo Dorothy's problems and struggles choosing one, as I'm kind of very closely related to agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure here at my role in APG. But I would like maybe to highlight kind of agrivoltaics for three reasons. One, I think agrivoltaics is right now a model that centers in the concept of coexistence, focusing kind of synergies between the production of agriculture and development and the clean energy production. So synergies between sectors, it's very relevant rather than treating those type of solutions or those type of sectors as competing. It's kind of a synergistic relationship. Second, I think it's increasingly relevant and it's growing very quickly, at least here in the US. We're seeing a lot of not competition, but a lot of solar developers focusing on these type of solutions. And then third, pretty much kind of back to my role here, pretty much because we're right now working very closely with a solar developer that is within our portfolio, centering its business model around developing relationship with communities, and kind of focusing the strategy on agrivoltaics. So it's kind of at the center of what we're doing here. So that would be my choice today.
Thank you, Santiago, and I appreciate the difficulty. Lots of inspiration here, and those are just few of the examples covered by the 80+ case studies. So lots of inspiration for everyone. A quick reminder about the questions. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box. We'll get to them later on in the webinar. So the transition towards a nature-positive economy requires financial institutions and businesses to mobilize and change their business models, their products, services, and investments. We at Global Canopy believe that when we're looking at such complex, diversified organizations, we must be prepared to scrutinize and challenge the credibility of their activities, particularly if they are portrayed as supporting nature, but equally highlight examples where they effectively deliver and restore nature. So a difficult question now, but it's an important one for us. How can we ensure the credibility of nature-related opportunities? David, what are your thoughts on this?
So it's a really interesting question. There's very little that we do in industrial processes that doesn't harm nature or use resources in some way. So we've got to be careful to draw a line or set a bar that means everything has to be absolutely perfect. And likewise, we have to stop people making claims that damage credibility and overemphasize the things that they are doing that's good. But let me answer the question by giving an example, because I'm focused on this impact reduction, because we think about investing in nature as investing in growing new things or developing new things, which is brilliant and fine, and we have to carry on. But we have to, as Andrew said, invest in the things that stop the harm to nature. But one of the examples I really love is the recycling of electronic componentry, which today is a highly wasteful activity, creates lots of chemicals in our air, in our soil, and actually reduces our ability to reclaim some of the precious metals that are wasted in these circuit boards. And there's one of the examples actually reclaims them using eutectic salts to dissolve the metals off, and does it without nearly as much waste or bad materials. But there is going to be some waste or bad materials in that process. It's almost unavoidable. So I think as businesses and investors, we have to make a decision about not what's perfect, but what's better and what's substantially better, and just be clear and transparent about what we're doing. And not try and pretend that everything we do is going to be absolutely perfect. We can't be angels overnight. We have to stop damaging and do that progressively. I think the biggest challenge for us is, how do we take these new technologies? And there's a lot of questions in there about the ROI being higher and how do they scale? The problem is the ROI isn't higher at the moment because they're subscale. We have the wind turbine problem, and wind turbines became so successful because we had policy and subsidy in place that drove scale ahead of the market. So I think one of the challenges for us as a community and a financial community is, how do we achieve scale and not allow these things to dissolve away? Because left to market forces on their own, often the change is cheaper than change. That's the problem. So how do we incentivize the change and understand that nothing is ever going to be absolutely perfect, but we have to be transparent about the reductions in impacts that we are making and can make, with a sensible ROI and investment behind it.
Thank you, David. Now, I want us to examine practical actions for financial institutions. Andrew, what do you think? What steps do you think financial institutions can take after reading the book to invest in nature-positive opportunities?
Well, I've got three sort of things I would just say. I think the first is look at your portfolio or existing portfolio with our framework in mind, and try tagging. I think this could be really interesting, is to set up a tagging framework for nature business using our framework rather than the old concept of it. And you might find you're investing in a lot more nature business than you thought. So you could instantly say, not only we are doing this, and it helps to reveal nature in existing portfolios. I think that's one thing we could do. I think another thing is to think of investing in nature as infrastructure. Sometimes if you talk to investors about an infrastructure project, they find it much more familiar. I mean, it could be, keeping a mangrove going on the coast is infrastructure. But if you're repurposing a building to be a vertical farming unit, that's an infrastructure business and real estate. So it's another way of looking at nature. And the third thing I'd look at is product innovation in the finance sector. Maybe you can bundle some of these, the use of proceeds across, say, construction, and you can take a construction bond that might have eco-concrete in it, it might have some cross-laminated timber in it, and so on. And that would help to de-risk the portfolio a bit, because these are really businesses that have good returns, that are predictable. And so I think we could do some really good innovation on product innovation as well for investing.
Thank you, Andrew. Mitch, can I go over to you for your thoughts on what financial institutions could do? Quick thoughts.
Yeah, very quick. Okay, so I'm just gonna piggyback off of what Andrew just said. I think, you know, you can go to an investor and say, "Hey, I've got a nature, blah blah blah," and they're like, "Oh no, oh, I'm got that," you know, oh, you know, it's like, or I've got low correlated returns that will diversify your portfolio and deliver overall superior risk-adjusted returns. You know, use the language of the market, and that, you know, you know. So speaking about this, of course, from the impact side, but also from the investment side. So very quickly, so I think that you know, technology innovation, couch the financial and investment attributes and outcomes in those terms. The low correlated returns aspect is just such a good complement to any portfolio. But I think for scalability, market-based returns, what do you need for success is to show that these investments work. And that will draw more capital in. So, but you have to meet the market, and that may require in the beginning blended solutions where you have risk mitigation or you have return enhancing components to it. But that means building new partnerships, and all of that stuff is happening now. So let me stop there. I know we're on the clock, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mitch. So we have covered a lot today. John, I would like to get your top 3 takeaways from this discussion. Thank you, John.
Well, narrowing down this discussion to 2 or 3 lessons is difficult. I might even say a thankless task, because we've heard lots of good points. We just heard one that we hadn't heard earlier that I thought was fantastic, and that was Mitch's point about using the language of the market, using the language of business and finance, because after all, that's what this is about. Yes, there is a double bottom line element to it, but ultimately it is about generating investment opportunities in the real economy related to nature. Another point that I would make is that collaboration is important. Investing in biodiversity or in nature requires not only business and finance skills, but it also requires an understanding of the living world, of how the biosphere operates. And doing it right is going to require experts from not just business and finance, but from a variety of fields. And the third point I would make, I suppose, would be the one that is consistent with the results of the survey at the beginning of this webinar. And that is that really most people's understanding of investing in nature business and nature finance is at a very early stage, and we have a long way to go.
Thank you, John. Those are excellent points. Now, we will open the panel to the audience's Q&A. We have already a few questions, but please keep them coming via the Q&A box. I'll start with Santiago and Mitch. A question for you two. When will we reach the tipping point where investors realize that nature positive investments offer greater returns than nature negative ones? Will achieving these on the necessary scale will ever be feasible? Over to you, Santiago or Mitch.
I guess I'll start with that. I think, okay, so as the book reports, 200 billion per annum is going into nature-based investing versus a need of 1.5 trillion. So there's some base numbers there to say you're getting closer to quote unquote a tipping point when that gap closes. That's one thing. 2, growth rates, and the growth rates are scaling up very quickly. I would say on the climate side, for example, you know, you've got 2 billion going into renewable energy growing at 25% per year. Emerging market development entities are the largest generators of carbon emissions. I know it's not necessarily the same topic, but it's the same idea. And so I think you're beginning to reach positive tipping points in those areas. Last thing I'll say about this, a lot of these case studies, they're very innovative, very equity-like. When these start growing and generating cash flow, and these companies can take on bank debt or issue debt in the market, then you know you're there. You know you're at a real tipping point, because that's visibility on you've gone through that rapid growth period, and then you're in a kind of maturing space as a company, and you're generating cash and you can borrow money. That's a real tipping point, I would say. But we're getting close, I think.
Thank you, Mitch. Santiago, do you have anything to add?
Maybe just to add, I think we all agree here that we are at a very nascent and early stage of investing in nature. I think when we start really understanding how to, and I think this book makes a great case here, which is kind of presenting more than 80 cases where you really understand how is that you can integrate nature within different aspects of the real economy, within different kind of sectors. That's where you're going to start kind of seeing or kind of bring more capital into the space. Yeah, that's what I kind of would add to this.
Thank you, Santiago. Dorothy, I have a question for you. What types of investment, and you were alluding to this earlier in your interventions, what types of investment in nature-related opportunities have you seen from financial institutions based in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think I mentioned a few, but for us, what we are seeing main opportunity areas being clustered around sustainable agriculture, blue economy, finance. I talked about carbon and biodiversity markets. There's also quite a bit of conservation-linked financing, of course, tied to outcome-based payments or outcome-based bonds. And where there's still a bit of a question mark is on core payment for ecosystem service types. And what I've seen is more on ways within which most of these solutions are being bundled or are being looked at in totality. And I think one of the main things that is also coming through is the role of insurance and de-risking in all this. So when you talk about carbon and biodiversity markets, you do know where we are in terms of integrity. And so the de-risking component really comes out strongly. And again, the interest from institutional investors, not just locally, but also globally. But one thing I want to mention is something that struck me in some of the discussions that we've had, especially when we speak of global investors who are looking at Africa. They are really looking at Africa from more of an offset market. And that for us, when you look at biodiversity core, is not really where many biodiversity projects really want to speak of from an African perspective. So that's still an area that we really need to look at separately.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. David, what great examples have you seen from the TNFD adopters cohort of investment in nature-related opportunities?
Well, we're seeing plenty of evidence of now, as I mentioned, 40% of companies that are doing a TNFD assessment are actually making changes. And I think the book gives some great example with the 80 examples of many of those changes that are made. I want to build on something Mitch said, which I think was very interesting, which is when does this turn from equity to debt and when does it become investable and bankable? I would agree that many of these things are quite nascent. Electronic recycling that I mentioned, sodium batteries, a great example. You think of the potential of moving from lithium to sodium, not just from the nature impact, but the battery market and how big that could be. They're still nascent and being proven. But many of the TNFD assessments are actually starting at some of the big basic areas like water reduction and water recycling. And here you've got billion-dollar companies that have been established for many years that are billion-dollar investments that are helping you reduce the amount of water, recycle water, reuse water, capture rainwater, all elements. We have a water crisis. It's one of our biggest nature issues, largely brought around by climate change, but also the amount of water we use. So let's not let the readers and the audience think that everything is highly experimental and nascent. There certainly are some really fascinating, highly experimental and nascent. I'm an investor myself. I work a lot in this area. There's also some very basic things you can do, which are well established and very investable now. So I think there's a portfolio of things, and our companies that are involved in TNFD are looking across that portfolio and discovering more areas. The companies that are getting ahead are using this as an opportunity. The companies that are falling behind are the ones that think of this as just disclosure and compliance and are digging their feet in saying that there's no opportunity here. I mean, we need to persuade those that actually there's a greener side to this. There's light on the other side of the fence, and you become far more attractive and investable if you start to look at some of these new technologies and processes that reduce your impacts, save you money, create new products, and actually put you and your colleagues and your workforce on a path of innovation.
Thank you so much, David. Andrew and John, we have a question related to whether there has been any discussion about the role of insurance in helping catalyze the nature positive transition. Do any of you want to take this question on?
John, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, well, I might say that while insurance is not something that we've looked at in any detail for purposes of this book, there are a number of ways in which insurance can be used. And I see Dorothy nodding, and she may have something to add to this. But I mean, catastrophe bonds are one obvious way in which insurance mechanisms can be used for purposes of nature finance. Microinsurance for small landholder farms is another way. Dorothy, anything that you would like to add?
No, for me, it's just based on the risk profile and the diversity. So when you talk of agriculture in my market, for example, insurance then becomes a key mechanism for micro insurance, as you said.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you so much, John and Dorothy. And finally, a question to Andrew. To scale up MBS, Stern states that there is the need for government leadership, public pressure, and the creativity of the private sector. Is any more needed?
Well, certainly in the traditional NBS sector, certainly my experience of working with impact investment funds and so on, very often these don't really work without blended finance vehicles. And the big problem with that is the time it takes for governments to make decisions on lending the money into the process, into the fund. It can take 2 or 3 years, and that's far too long for the private sector. That's a major problem. I pick up what David said, though, that there are a lot of new technologies here in the book which are already getting cash flows going, but they're not at scale yet. And so getting from the innovative stage up to a scale stage, like what Mitch was saying, moving from equity to debt, that in climate it took feed-in tariffs to do that for renewable energy, and now countries are making more renewable energy than they are of traditional energy. So yes, there's a massive role for governments in these early stages, and I think the profile for nature will be similar to climate. It's going to take time for this to happen, but it'll go much faster if governments can provide incentives.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So thank you everyone for your questions, and of course thank you again to our speakers and panelists. Before we close, I want to give the book's co-authors a minute each for their closing thoughts. John, can we start with you? 1 minute?
Sure, happy to start. I suppose I would say that the financial industry has gone quite a significant way towards tackling the challenge of climate finance and climate business. And yes, we have a long way to go. But as I like to remind my friends in the physical sciences, the biosphere is inherently more complex than the atmosphere. biology is inherently more complex than chemistry. So, as you would expect, nature business and nature finance are some way behind the area of climate, but things are just getting started. So, stay tuned.
That was extremely succinct, John. Thank you very much. Andrew, over to you.
Well, I really wanted to thank everybody for coming on this call, and all the people who've put in questions. We haven't had time to answer them. It'd be great if we were able to answer some of them offline, but there's still a lot of questions here. The point I want to make, I think of this as a kind of Lonely Planet guide to investing in nature. It's just a guidebook. It's just a start. It doesn't have the whole plan there. But we need to get this guidebook out there. So do all you can to tell people that it exists, because coming back to one of the key points that was made earlier, education is key. If we can get this in the hands of the people who are making financial decisions, then they will have the guidebook there and they can make their own choices after that, but they'll be much better informed. And we perhaps should think of podcasts or training programs or something like that we can build off this. There's a long way to go, but it's a great start. And I'm so encouraged by all the positive things that I've heard today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone. Indeed, we had lots of questions that we don't have the time to cover as part of the webinar, but it shows the excitement and the interest in the conversation behind the little book of nature business and what we can do on the back of it. I want to thank, of course, our panelists and speakers today for joining us and for bringing all the excitement and, of course, their support throughout this journey. We at Global Canopy are keen to build on and expand on the ideas presented in the Little Book of Nature Business and deepen the analysis to help investors identify and assess the credibility of these emerging nature-related opportunities, but most importantly also to scale finance that is directed towards the nature-positive economy. We need rapid action, as we all agree, to mobilize capital towards credible nature-related investments. And we invite you to engage in this conversation, as we must bring all ideas, innovation and ambition to ramp up the pace of, as Andrew said, the big nature turnarounds. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for your insightful questions. I hope you have found the webinar interesting. The webinar recording will be available on Global Canopy's website soon after the webinar ends. Before you go, don't forget to download your copy of the Little Book of Nature Business if you haven't done so. Please fill in the short survey that will appear after the webinar ends. We'll stay in touch, and goodbye for now. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon and day. Thank you, everyone.